And good morning to all of you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm humbled by the kind introduction of Dr. Florencia Rosario Braid, whom I've known since the early 90s, whom I interviewed for my masteral thesis at the National Defense College of the Philippines. I was then heavy with child, I think, with my second son, Leandro, who's now into solar power. And it was Dr. Braid whom I interviewed as one of my resource persons for my thesis, which was entitled The National Security Implications of News and Public Affairs Programs. At the time, I was a practicing journalist in ABS-CBN, being a producer and a news anchor, and a reporter as well. And I believed that reporting the news and producing public affairs programs had national security implications. Among the people I interviewed then also were a part of Dr. Braid, I believe then rebel leader, senator who was not yet a senator, Greg Honasan, and National Security Advisor Almonte, as well as Saturo Campo. So you can see the varied political colors from those interviews. It was Dr. Braid who gave me the insight from a journalistic and academic point of view on the importance of journalism. Little did I know way back in '92 when I interviewed her, or was it '91? I think '92, because at the time I was pregnant and I graduated from my MBCT course in '93. So it was '92. So that was what? I'm poor in math. So that's 22 years ago. Yes, 22 years ago, and she has not aged, and she's still at the helm and of journalism and academic institutions like AIJ, and I'm glad to have her here. But at the time, I was deep in journalism and producing shows, and I believed then, as I believe now, that media, the tri-media and now social media, has a great role, if not the most important role, in shaping public opinion. So whether it is in the national security aspect, or in influencing our people politically, or in mainstreaming DRR or disaster risk reduction in the consciousness of our 100 million population, media is so essential. I'm also happy to see, and having been invited by a good friend way back ABS-CBN days, he was the top honcho of ABS as the golden boy of then Henny Lopez, the late Henny Lopez, Mel Velarde. Are you now the chairman? Emeritus chairman, yes, of AIJ, apart from being a self-made Taipan. So glad to know that you're investing in the academia, and you're back to journalism. Let me know how else I could help, and I'm glad that you've come up with this theme, DRR and journalism in ASEAN. It is really so timely. And of course, it's like a reunion of sorts when I see Bridget Leone, because Bridget is a head of communications of the UNISDR, which has been in the forefront, of course, in mainstreaming DRR in our national consciousness, and of course in other nations as well. And it was way back in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, when Feng Min, who was one of the senior officers of the UNISDR and one of the consultants, Manny de Guzman, asked me to be their UN Asia Pacific champion. At the time, I must admit, while I was much into environment for 20 years and into climate change, DRR was quite unfamiliar territory. But I felt that it was the way to go in mainstreaming and putting together climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. That was 2007, it's 2014, almost 2015, and 8 years have passed. And yes, I believe you would agree with me, Bridget, that together with the UNISDR, we have awakened and opened the eyes of the Filipino media and the Filipino people into the importance of DRR, so that the paradigm shift from disaster response has been radically changed to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. I'd like to thank Professor Polo, also, who did, is it Polo? Yes, who did the welcome remarks, and all of you present here today. We have representatives from Laos, I believe, from Indonesia as well. How about from Thailand? Yes. Myanmar, did make it? And Cambodia. Yeah, these are countries I love dearly, which I visited a couple of times, and we have so much in common, not just because we're ASEAN, but also in terms of our culture, but that's another matter altogether. I visit your countries for your textiles, for your arts and crafts, because that is my other advocacy, apart from environment and sustainable development and disaster resilience. Lest I divert from my subject today, I will proceed with my written speech and some PowerPoints. Usually I just extemporize when my staff gives me a well-researched lecture or speech. However, I believe that it is also good so that you can also have a soft and hard copy of this and bring it back to your institutions. Disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation do not fall under the exclusive domain of government. It is a shared responsibility of government, communities, business, individuals, and media. Let me include and the academe as well. How many lives and properties we save is ultimately defined by the amount of meaningful effort and resources we put together into building resilience in our communities. My first term in the Senate was 1998, after 20 years in television. My advocacy has been consistent and clear. Protect our environment, build resilience to disasters, adapt to climate change, and to mitigate its impacts. If you see the photo there, some of our colleagues have passed away. I don't know why is it that they selected that photo. Maybe because to prove that I was there since they were alive. That was the late Senator Juan Flavier, was my seatmate of, I just have to say this aside because you might be wondering who are these senators now, because the young ones here may see, who are these people? That's Senator Juan Flavier, who was my seatmate from 1998 to 2004, and Senator Rene Cayetano. It's his two children who are the senators now. Senator Revilla is still alive, of course. Senator Sergio Mena is still alive and helping me craft the enacted into law the NALUA, or the National Land Use. Senator Biazon is now congressman, and I'm still there for 3 terms. Still alive. It was not an easy task, as people viewed the climate issue then as abstract, best reserved for experts, scientists, and probably crazy, passionate environmentalists such as myself. I spoke about climate change even during my days as a journalist, and people would either look the other way or just nod or turn their heads or say, why is she doing that? Her show will not receive high ratings. Or in the Senate, it would be the time people would go to merienda or have a smoke of cigarette in the lounge. However, in 2008, as part of my commitment to the 2008 Manila Call for Action, I filed a resolution recommending the creation of a standing committee on climate change in the Senate. Because while there has always been a committee on environment and agriculture and energy, there's never been a committee on climate change. There's never been an oversight committee on climate change. And of course, at the time, there was no commission on climate change. It is important that the media differentiates between and among these, because sometimes people confuse it. The standing committee is part of the legislature, and therefore I filed a resolution creating, on a permanent capacity, the Standing Committee on Climate Change. It was a commitment I made when parliamentarians from Asia Pacific gathered in the Philippines upon our initiative for the Manila Call for Action. In fact, one of the parliamentarians who attended in 2008 from Bangladesh, Saber Chowdhury, is now the president of the IPU. The Inter-Parliamentary Union recently elected him as the president of all the parliamentarians around the world, and he was one of my participants in the 2008 Manila Call for Action. So one of the outputs was for parliaments to create the Permanent and Standing Committee on Climate Change, which we did in the Senate, apart from the Oversight Committee on Climate Change. And on the same year, the Senate Committee on Climate Change was formed. It was a major milestone, resulting from a slow process of interest building, engagement, and action. Gradually, climate change became a part of the local dialogue. I filed resolutions, and these resolutions were referred to the committee which I created, which I eventually chaired, which I continue to chair now, which is the Climate Change Committee. However, solutions did not come readily. It had to take a typhoon, Katsana, or Ondoy in 2009, with a massive loss of lives and the inundation of Central Luzon, Southern Tagalog, and Metro Manila that it brought, for Filipinos to realize that climate change is not just a scientific or environmental issue or phenomenon, but an all-encompassing threat to us, our aspirations, and our very survival. That's a classic picture of what Ondoy really was to all of us. In less than 30 days after Ondoy, the Philippine Climate Change Act was passed. This was a bill which I crafted in 2006 when I was not a senator, filed in 2007 when I became a senator for the second term, and eventually passed a month after Ondoy happened. So in short, it languished for almost 2.5 years because it was not understood by some, because it was not supported by many of my colleagues. But when Ondoy happened, they realized, oh, is this what she means? Is this what is needed? And so the Climate Change Act was passed. The Climate Change Act, as you know, created the now Commission on Climate Change, which is chaired by no less than President Aquino. At the time when I wrote it and filed it, I did not know that Noy Noy, who was my seatmate, would become the president, because that was way 2007 when he was my seatmate at the back with Mar Rojas. I did not realize that the three commissioners would be Lucille, who's now in Lima, Peru, or Sunny Alvarez, who was a colleague but before my time, and Yeb Sanyo, who is from the NGO sector. I just dreamt, literally dreamt, that the Commission on Climate Change, long after I'm gone from the Senate, long after we're all gone from our respective spheres of influence, would have a permanent commission that would engage local communities into the local climate change action plans. This mandated to mainstream climate change adaptation in various phases of policy formulation. The National Action Plan on Climate Change has been done. The Commission is supposed to assist local governments in crafting their local action plan. The passage of the Climate Change Act was followed by the enactment of an equally important law, the Philippine National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act, which created the NDRIMC Council. I am contemplating again on creating another bill, filing another bill to enhance and strengthen the NDRIMC into a permanent, not an ad hoc council that would deal with DRR, CCA, and resilience. The order of business was no longer responding to disasters, but rather that of reducing the risk and building the resilience of communities. And this is where the UNISDR came in. The UNISDR taught me and supported me in my advocacy of changing the paradigm shift of the Philippines and the Filipinos from response-oriented to preparedness. As they say, for every $1 that you invest in DRR, you save $7 or $8 in terms of losses. And that has been proven in many investments in flood control in China and in many other areas of the world. It was a shift in policy that required not only redirection of resources from relief-oriented programs, but more importantly, the joint efforts of the national government and the local government units hand in hand with partner stakeholders. These two measures were hailed by the UNISDR. I don't know if Bridget was there in the presence of Margareta when she said that the NDRIMC law and the Climate Change Act are the two best laws in the world. So I felt inspired and empowered and humbled, but frustrated that at the time it was said, Haiyan had not happened. And despite the fact that we have two of the best laws in the world, why did Haiyan have to happen that way? I mean, the negative impact of Haiyan, if we really knew and implemented and operationalized the best laws in the world. But not to blame anyone, now we've learned a lesson, and I believe it has been a wake-up call, and we are more prepared now, although there's still much to be done. How can these laws mandate or translate to effective disaster risk reduction in every community? In the Philippines, there are 5 major factors that contribute to the country's vulnerability to natural hazards. What are these? Ecosystems decline, exposure of our economic assets, poverty, rapid growth of our cities, and climate change. These vulnerabilities can be addressed through the upgrading and enforcement of building standards by following our building code, risk-sensitive urban planning and investment, stronger social protection, promoting measures that advance economic and business resilience, and engaging communities in efforts to achieve resilience. I'd like to go back to the hazards. 1 page back, please. Ecosystems decline. Lest I simplify, but it's also important that I communicate clearly. What do you mean by this? Our ecosystems is made up of our biodiversity. Our biodiversity loss, when we cut our forests, cut our trees, and we lose our forests, we lose our flora and fauna. When our rivers, our lakes, are the repository of solid waste from Metro Manila, because RA 9003, or the Ecological Solid Waste Management Law, again, a law I authored 13 years ago, is it now a law? It's been a law since January of 2001. When it is not implemented, Pasig River and many other Metro Manila rivers become the repository of our solid waste. And whoever said, when God created water, our rivers and our lakes and our bays, He never said that is where you throw your urine and your SHIT. So why do we use it as a repository of human waste? Ganun na lamang tayo kasamang tao. So I have to say it very graphically, because really, our ecosystems, we are blessed with such varied wealth, because we are the center of biodiversity in the world. But why do we destroy what we have? And these ecosystems not just decline, but deteriorate and disappear when we, humans, abuse it. Exposure of our economic assets. That's very clear. Our energy, our power plants, our buildings, infrastructure, etc. The exposure to natural hazards affects it. Poverty, that's very clear. The unsustainability of our lives, the non-protection of rural livelihoods like weaving, like natural dye, like the arts and crafts and the schools of living tradition of our 15 million indigenous peoples. If only we protect this and we enhance it, then perhaps the 50 million who are impoverished could be halved, could be reduced into half. Because the people will not have to converge in urban areas and stay where they are in the rural areas. And weaving and natural dye and arts and crafts can be part of our cultural domestic tourism. Just like Laos is, just like Myanmar is, just like Thailand is, just like Indonesia is, just like Cambodia is, just like our ASEAN neighbors. I have crossed the Mekong River to go to little towns, barangays if you call it, that does weaving. I have gone to homes, not weaving centers, in Cambodia, just to look at their natural dye and their weaving. I've seen the lovely little community museum in Luang Prabang, which inspired me to do the Hibla Textile Gallery in the National Museum. I've gone to Inla Lake in Myanmar and crossed and flew small planes and crossed the lake to see a little weaving, not even town, a house on stilts that does weaving from lotus flowers, as suggested by
our icon of democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi. So these are little anecdotes of how we can beat poverty if we focus on rural, sustainable livelihoods. The rapid growth of cities. We converge in cities. The urban squalor, the traffic, which is bad for the health, for the environment, for economic development. It's just unsustainable. And Manila, Metro Manila is definitely not just livable. And of course, climate change. I don't even want to call it climate change because it is already a climate crisis. Climate change is a term of the 80s. It is already called the climate crisis. Having said all this, I now wish to emphasize the need to integrate DRR reporting in journalism education, not just in AIJ, not just in selected universities, but in every college, university, probably even in basic education. Media is a strong platform that can encourage action, but to be able to effect positive action, a journalist must create that awareness by first understanding the issue. To be an effective communicator, the journalist must have a full grasp of a phenomenon's cause and effect, even more so for the phenomenon of climate change, which is so complex and so overreaching in its impacts that we should now begin calling it, as I said, the climate crisis. So it's never enough because the climate continues to change up to the point of crisis proportion. It is important that our reporters, whether it is your beat or not, it is important that our guests understand this. It is important that editors and publishers give it importance. It is important that television producers understand it. While there is much focus on politics, which is counterproductive, equally important focus, perhaps more, should be on sustainable development, on business continuity planning, on the utilization of our Doppler radar, for example. Who has written about it? The Doppler radar, which is based in Tagaytay City, which covers 400 kilometers of radius, which can measure in millimeters and centimeters rainfall. Has anyone covered it? No. If I were a journalist, I would have written about it. If I were a journalist, I would have reported it in my television show, believe me. Because way back, 30 years ago, when I started out my career, I would cover the Pasig River and the Tuliahan River. And people would ask, and my colleagues in news would say, huh? Why would you do that? And again, I challenge you journalists to do those things which really matter in making our people understand, in using media as a tool to saving lives. DRR and CCA are issues that every journalist must understand. Sometimes I am perceived to be the terror of some reporters who are scared to approach me because after asking me a question in politics, I would ask them basic DRR CCA questions 101. And they would look the other way and maybe not answer because they don't understand. And Senate reporters know this. I eventually come to my office. Okay, they want to talk politics? I said, next question. Then I would give them a lecture on climate change. Here she goes again. But when Ondoy happened, when Sendong happened, when Pablo happened, when Hayang happened, Yolanda, and Ruby happened. Ruby Paulo is here. She's not the Bagyo. Okay. I've inquired before. Anyway, they say, oh, this is what she means. And I think it's the biggest psychic reward when young reporters, and the not so young, would tell me, ito pala yung sinasabi mo, Senator, 10 years ago. Because I would beg them actually and tell them, i-cover naman nyo ako. I would, sinusubo ko ang speech ko, in-email ko na sa inyo, basahin nyo. Sulatin mo naman i-front page. Maski naman isang linya, ilagay nyo. That was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. After Ondoy, after Yolanda, they would come to me and say, they would be first to text a question. What do you think of our preparedness? What do you think of that? So it had to take these things. It's never too late. The responsibility of a journalist to deliver timely, relevant, concise, accurate, underscore accurate information to the public does not happen only when there is an incoming typhoon, storm surge, flood, or volcanic eruption. Why do you say accurate? Because I don't know if it is the technological revolution or the computers when there's autocorrect or the iPhone. I'm sorry to say, there's so much inaccuracy. During my time, we had inaccuracy. Even in Cargen, I would flip out when I would be there, and Mel Velarde would know that. I would not stand for any inaccuracy because that's permanent. But during our time, we could erase it from the Cargen and television. But now, once it's on the web forever. I would not stand for any wrong grammar, typo, comma, period, or inaccurate, unsubstantiated, unverified fact, especially when it comes to science, especially when this inaccurate information would lead to lives that could be lost and livelihoods that could be lost as well. So the pen or your computer or your phone, that are your tools towards the accuracy of the information and the power that you use. So whether it's a typhoon or a storm surge, for example, a storm surge, if we were able to communicate it clearly, in November 8 of 2013, they said, hindi kasi alam na mga tao kung ano ang storm surge. That is not true. Because for the past 10, 20 years, I have been writing, talking, and delivering speeches on storm surge, as I have on climate change and environment.